Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. As Professor Ramamurthy mentioned, I'm Florie Liser, President and CEO of the Corporate Council on Africa, the leading U.S. business association focused exclusively on promoting greater U.S.-Africa trade, investment, and business partnerships. Our member companies, both U.S. and African, multinationals, as well as SMEs, represent a diverse pool of industries active in Africa's most promising sectors, including agribusiness, energy, finance, health, ICT, infrastructure, and security. So I guess people would ask why Africa matters. Well, at CCA, we believe in the promise and great potential of U.S.-Africa business relations. Africa is not monolithic. Its countries represent a diversity of history, culture, people, and language. While Africa is complex, its strategic and economic relevance to the United States, however, is clear. By the year 2025, more than half the population of Africa will be under age 25. By 2050, a quarter of the world's population will be African, and Nigeria will surpass the United States as the third most populous country in the world. In that same year, 2 in every 5 children will be born in Africa. And by 2100, the year 2100, 13 of the world's 20 biggest urban areas will be in Africa. The continent is already one of the fastest growing consumer markets in the world with 1.7 billion people, and its growing middle class and large youth population represent significant export opportunities and partnership opportunities for U.S. businesses and for U.S. goods and services. A productive youth population in Africa not only expands U.S. market opportunities, but also reduces the conditions that foster global insecurity. Economic development, as you know, is essential to revitalize markets, encourage investment, private sector investment, and address secondary social and economic impacts caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Africa is producing much of the world's next generation of entrepreneurs, innovators, and technology experts who aspire to create jobs, fix inequities, and address political, social, and economic challenges across the continent and the world. U.S. companies are their natural commercial partners, in my opinion, and their service providers in achieving much needed economic diversification in Africa. I'd like to say a little bit now about the African Continental Free Trade Area, what we call Afcfta. Africa is poised to become one of the world's most important economic regions. When the 54-country African Continental Free Trade Area is fully implemented, it will comprise the 5th largest economic bloc in the world, representing a huge source of jobs, consumers, innovation, and power to shape the global economy. The Afcfta is a game changer for Africa's own economic integration and regional trade, as well as pulling African products and services into global value chains and boosting trade-related investment. It will also require that African governments improve their business climates, promote good governance, support private sector-led growth that creates jobs, and invest in their businesses, especially SME, youth, and women-owned enterprises. It will be imperative for African governments to work more closely together, improving energy and transportation infrastructure across borders, addressing climate change and food security, and digitizing trade are other areas ripe for private sector involvement that will be vital to maximizing the continent's cohesion and success under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. In a speech on U.S.-Africa policy in Nigeria last November, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken welcomed the African Continental Free Trade Area because, he said, we want to see Africa's economic power in the world grow. More consumers should gain access to African goods and services. More jobs must be created for Africa's young people, the global workforce of the future. end quote. I share Secretary Blinken's enthusiasm for the Afcfta. In addition, I believe in the importance of Africa not only increasing intra-African trade, currently at only around 15%, but also enhancing Africa's benefits from and role in the global trading system. Value addition and export diversification is needed to increase Africa's share of world trade, only at about 3% today, and to integrate African suppliers into regional and global value chains and support industrialization in Africa and job creation there as well. And I think that increasing US-Africa trade can play an important role in that. Now, let me speak a little bit about AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act. Since 2000, AGOA has provided eligible countries in Africa duty-free access to American markets for thousands of products. AGOA's aim has been to increase both trade and foster partnerships between US and African companies, and to encourage US companies to invest in manufacturing and value addition in Africa. CCA supports the annual AGOA Private Sector Forum, which has always provided a great opportunity to touch base not only with the African governments, but with companies that are on the ground to get a better sense of what is working and what could be changed for the better. AGOA in its current form is set to expire in 2025, just 3 years away, and Congress is beginning to think through what approaches would make the most sense for the future. Prosper Africa is another initiative of the United States that I'd like to touch on. CCA has worked closely with the US government to support our latest major trade initiative on the continent, which is called Prosper Africa. Announced in December 2018, Prosper Africa brings together 17 US government agencies to expand two-way trade and investment between the United States and Africa. Prosper Africa has been quick off the mark to incorporate new tools from the Development Finance Corporation, which used to be OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. And it's also pulled in the Export-Import Bank of the United States, Exim Bank, as well as the Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC. In 2020, the US government also set up deal teams, formalizing and expanding long-standing support that many US embassies in Africa have provided for companies coming to Africa and looking to invest in African business. We are also working with a number of individual countries in Africa to help shine the light on them, especially those that are doing what we would all like to see them do, supporting their people, reducing poverty, and increasing democratic engagement. A recent example of CCA's support for Prosper Africa was a US-Zambia Business and Investment Forum we organized just this past December. One of the good news stories about democracy in Africa that Secretary Blinken mentioned in his speech was about Zambia, where the opposition party won elections in August, something few believe would be allowed to happen. Our virtual forum served as a platform to explore and engage directly with the governments of Zambia and the United States, as well as the private sector, on opportunities for partnerships in key sectors. The event featured the president of Zambia, as well as senior officials from the US and Zambia, and key private sector investors in that country. This was one of our final events in a very busy and productive year for CCA, highlighted by our 2021 US-Africa Business Summit, which was held virtually because of the pandemic. We also held several programs in September on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, UNGA, including hosting the presidents of Tanzania, the only woman, female president on the continent, President Samia. And we also featured the president of Namibia, president of Kenya, and the president of the African Development Bank, as well as 4 Nigerian state governors. Let me move forward and share with you a little bit about a newer initiative that's looking to promote investment in the key sector of infrastructure in Africa. This is B3W, as we call it, the Build Back Better World. In June 2021, President Biden and G7 partners agreed to launch the bold new Global Infrastructure Initiative, B3W, a values-driven, high-standard, and transparent infrastructure partnership led by major democracies to help narrow the $14 trillion infrastructure gap that needs to be met in the developing world. This has been exacerbated, no less, by the pandemic, what's happened to infrastructure and supply chains in Africa and all around the world, as we all know. Through B3W, the G7 and other like-minded partners will coordinate in mobilizing private sector capital in 4 areas of focus: climate, health and health security, digital technology, and last but not least, gender equity and equality, each of which will have catalytic investments from our respective development finance institutions. Let me turn to a couple of these focus areas, health and digital technology, and expand on the private sector role in Africa. Health, I feel, is really, really critical. I think we all know that now better than ever because of COVID. I feel that collaboration between governments and the private sector is critical to meeting the unprecedented challenges caused by the pandemic while progressing on economic development issues. Ensuring more equitable vaccine access is a key first step that offers businesses in sectors ranging from health to ICT a unique opportunity to work together to meet Africa's public health needs. Both companies and governments have had to scramble over the last year to deal with unexpected and profound shocks to supply chains. There is now a great opportunity in 2022 and beyond for companies and governments to develop a more resilient, secure set of supply chains and expand their collaboration to create new markets. I also think this is a great time to pull African countries into those supply chains so that Africa can produce more of the products that are needed and that we're not all dependent on just one region or one country of the world to supply what we need. CCA hopes that through our health initiative, we call it the U.S. Africa Health Security and Resilience Initiative, we hope to bring both U.S. and African public and private stakeholders together to discuss ways to collaborate on not only fighting COVID, but also building stronger African health systems for the future. Our initiative is a good example of the potential for collaboration to deliver real results on the ground in Africa. It is also a great time for companies, members of CCA like Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and others, non-governmental organizations and African governments to build on the notable achievements that have been made in several areas, including malaria and reproductive health, fighting HIV/AIDS, as well as expanding collaboration on critical issues like non-communicable diseases in Africa, like diabetes, and to also improve capacity building in the health sector in Africa, which is desperately needed. Now, in terms of digital technologies, our members are very active in working with small businesses and startups in Africa. For example, last October, Google, which is a member of CCA, announced its plans to invest $1 billion in Africa over the next 5 years to ensure access to fast and cheaper internet and to back startups to support the continent's digital transformation. FinTech, which we all know stands for financial tech, has made a big impact in African countries, especially in Nigeria and Kenya, in areas such as electronic payments, cryptocurrency, and digital banking. One of our members, Flutterwave, a Nigerian and American-based company, is very active in the electronics payment sector on the continent. And so as the world tackles climate change, we're seeing that green tech will also become increasingly important, encompassing a range of products from electric vehicles to solar panels. So yes, there are some challenges in Africa. We know that there still remains some corruption in some countries, but corruption is not peculiar to the continent of Africa. We know that democracy is also under pressure across the continent, with many Africans living under at least partially authoritarian governments. And unfortunately, military coups overthrew civilian governments in Chad, Mali, Guinea, and Sudan in 2021, and in Burkina Faso just last month. Instability and insecurity affect a number of African countries, including Ethiopia, Nigeria, Somalia, Mozambique, Cameroon, Mali, and Niger. And these threats posed by armed conflict and crime impede economic growth and undermine development. But let me just say, to counter the challenges, I want to also make sure that we know about the good news stories about Africa, the things that are happening there that are positive, and that we're not just looking at the bad news, which we see on the news, but we recognize that all across the continent, there is progress that's being made, democracy that's being made, excellent leaders of Africa, and companies and businesses all across Africa that are doing great things in promoting economic development on the continent. Let me just speak to China. Lots of people talk about China in Africa. I think we know that China is the largest investor in Africa and is active in almost all the countries on the continent, especially in infrastructure projects. But what a lot of people don't know is that the US, through its Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC, has also invested in Africa in the infrastructure sector, more than $11 billion across the continent. And I have personally had the pleasure of seeing a number of those projects: roads, ports, energy facilities. I've seen a lot of them, and we are behind also building Africa's infrastructure. And I would be remiss if I just talked about what China's doing and didn't mention what the United States is doing as well. And beyond government, I also feel that US business engagement in Africa can be more beneficial to local populations, a path that is somewhat different than the one that China sets. Many have noted that those projects have low environmental standards, labor issues at times, and also saddle African nations with significant debt. As Secretary Blinken said in his speech in Nigeria in November, our approach will be sustainable, it will be transparent, it will be values driven. We want to create local jobs and benefit local communities. We support anti-corruption and transparency measures so leaders and citizens in Africa can evaluate whether deals made on their behalf really are worth it. And we want to protect workers and the environment. So looking ahead, I just want to end by talking for just a moment about our hopes for 2022 and beyond. CCA has high hopes for the continent of Africa, for the governments, for the people, and for US engagement with our African partners through the private sector and through US government. While Afcfta implementation and phase 2 negotiations proceed on the African side, we also anticipate that the Biden administration will set a path for a stronger, re-energized US-Africa relationship, advancing the Prosper Africa Build Together campaign and B3W projects in Africa, and launching a Digital Africa initiative. We also hope the USG will announce a new economic partnership framework that supports Afcfta implementation, builds on AGOA, and moves ahead on the US-Kenya FTA or other trade negotiations. The recent announcement by USTR that it will be going back to the table with the Kenyans perhaps signals a transition to resuming full FTA talks, hopefully in the future. And we're excited that the year will be topped off with a much welcome US-Africa Leaders Summit. CCA looks forward to actively supporting the US-Africa economic agenda in the new year, highlighted by hosting our own signature US-Africa Business Summit in Morocco in July. And I just want to say again, thanks so much to Northeastern University for inviting me to be a part of this first Africa conference. And I look forward to answering any questions and to hearing what all the other panelists have to say. Thank you so much.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for those insightful and very thorough remarks, Florie. It's an honor to have you on this very first African Business Conference. Good morning and good day, good evening, depending on where you're calling in from. My name is Aya once again. I'm gonna be leading the Q&A. So I would like to start with a question regarding trade and self-reliance. So for many African countries, which are import dependent, like Nigeria, where I'm calling from, what type of policies and recommendations, other recommendations would you give in order for them to be more self-reliant and supply more local/regional demand, as well as diversify the products produced and traded regionally in addition to globally?
Well, thank you, Ayo. I think that's a great question, and one that many of us working in Africa over the years have asked. I think the key is to adding value to Africa's products. I think many of you know that Africa is at the bottom of the supply chain for almost every product category. They export the cocoa beans and import the cocoa products and the chocolate. They export the cotton and import textiles and apparel. They export raw copper and import copper piping. We could go on and on and on. And part of the reason why Africa is not a bigger player in the global economy and global trading, you know, as I said earlier, they account for only 3% of all world trade, which is hard to believe when you look at all of the products that Africa has. So they have to actually invest on their own and attract investment into those supply chains so that they are processing and manufacturing value-added products on the continent, and thereby being able to supply the needs of their own local economies, to ship those products across the continent so that Nigeria is shipping to Ghana, and Ghana is shipping to Liberia, and Kenya is shipping to Ethiopia, and DRC is shipping to Lesotho. I mean, we have to have more of that happening on the continent in order for Africa to become more self-reliant and to produce more of the products that don't only meet demand in the African market, but can meet global demand as well. And I'll just say this, that what's happened with COVID and with the supply of vaccine and PPE is a perfect example. Supply chains broke down. People couldn't get PPE from China and Korea and other places. And this was an opportunity for Africa to step in and to start producing PPE itself to meet, you know, masks and so forth, to meet the needs of African people and not just wait to get it from other places. I also think it's incredible advance that Africans are now being partnered with major companies like Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson to produce vaccine for COVID on the continent. And now that malaria vaccine has come into play, I'm hoping to see that Africa, which suffers from malaria probably more than any other continent, will also be producing their own malaria vaccines. So that's a long answer to the question, but the key is diversification of African products, value addition on the continent.
Thank you so much. So I hope with your wise words, someone drafting policies will definitely implement. On to my next question. Given Africa's low percentage of regional trade, I think it's about 18%, as well as small share of global trade, which is minute, as you mentioned, 3%, and FDI, foreign direct investments, which is even more minute, which is, I think, less than 2%. What's your personal outlook for the continent of Africa with regards to international trade and FDI? And what role do you think the private sector, including from the US, can play in this field?
Well, thank you, Ayo. Again, just to follow up on the previous question, this is really about what has to happen in African countries in order for them to be able to scale up their production, both for local supply as well as for regional and global trade. And I think that we have to address the supply side constraints. One of the largest supply side constraints in Africa is access to power, electricity, which clearly affects the competitiveness. I've had the privilege over the years of visiting a number of African factories all across the continent, producing all sorts of products, eyeglasses, toys, apparel, value-added agricultural products. I have not been to one African factory that did not use a backup generator. And of course, once you're using a backup generator, you not only have higher cost for production of your product, but you also are affecting the environment, right? So we have to look at these supply side constraints. We have to address issues like finance. A lot of African companies, especially smaller ones, women-owned, youth-owned companies, don't have access to the finance they need. So we need to scale up finance and capital that goes to businesses in Africa, whether in the production of goods or services. The digital economy, I think last year, Africa had a lot of investment into digital platforms. That's like great news, but we need a lot more of that, and we need it in other sectors as well. And I think the US government can play a role in terms of the policies it has. What will it do about AGOA? Will it negotiate free trade agreements? But I also think that the doing business environment is in the hands of African leaders. How easy is it for businesses, whether they're local businesses or foreign businesses, to get licenses, to resolve commercial disputes? These are things that are in the hands of the African governments. And by improving the doing business environment, they will, in our view, attract more investment. They will make it easier for their own entrepreneurs to do well, and for foreign businesses who come and invest to also do well.
Thank you for that. I'm going to open the questions to the floor. If anyone has any questions, feel free to populate it in the chat box. There's no sequence to picking these questions, but okay, I'm going to go for, I don't know who this is from, but the question is, if the US invested 11 billion USD dollars in infrastructure projects, how does that compare with investments from China, which are quite significant too?
Well, of course, what I'm saying is not that, it's not a competition between the US and China. First of all, everyone needs to understand that the US and China are not the only countries that are in Africa. Africa has partners from all around the world, and it should. The same reasons that the US and China are there are the reasons that France and the UK and Malaysia and India and Brazil and so many others are in Africa. So this is not about let's compete between the US and China in Africa. I was raising the issue because while people think about what China does, and they are very good at talking about what they do, the US, frankly, is not as good at talking about some of the things that it does. And that $11 billion that's been going into MCC infrastructure projects, I've seen with my own eyes, the kind of benefits that are accruing to African countries and African people because of those projects. And of course, MCC is not the only US government agency that's investing in Africa. The United States is still the largest provider of development assistance to the continent. USAID State Department, we provide a tremendous amount of aid. We are the largest donors of malaria and also HIV/AIDS medications. So we do a lot of things, but this is not about like brag about what the US does versus what China does. Africa, I think, needs and wants a range of partners. And what I'm saying is that I think the US, both the government and the US private sector, are excellent partners. There's not a country I've gone to, and I've gone to many, many countries on the continent many times, that says, we'd like more US investors. We like US products. We want to be able to partner with you. And we'd like to find out how we can get more investment and more partnerships from American firms. And so that's what CCA does. That's our goal, to urge our member companies, as well as others, to look at Africa and what Africa offers, and to not just go to Africa to do good, but to go to Africa to do well. And you can do both in Africa. So again, I think that people need to just know more about the kinds of things that we do and the kinds of opportunities that are in Africa.
Thank you once again, Florie. That question was actually from Chris Decker. Now I've got another question from Karine. African economies are more challenged by climate change, which you touched on, both in terms of transition risk and physical risk. I'm not entirely sure what the question is, but I'm guessing in terms of climate change, how do African economies address this issue in terms of transition and physical risk?
Well, I think I'm not an expert in this area, but let me say this much. I think that the crisis of global warming is something that all countries around the world need to focus on, and there needs to be collaboration to address climate change. It's something that affects every country. Lots of countries in Africa, as this questioner has said, are impacted by climate change. And but the Africans are not the ones who are the major producers of global warming. They're not the major contributors to global warming. So what that actually means is that there has to be a transition process and a transition period, so that Africa can continue to harvest the resources that it has, especially gas, which is a better option than coal, wood, and others, and provides a better lifestyle for African people. We can't have it, excuse me, that the developed world will not invest in the production of gas in Africa. That is a transition fuel. And then I think investment in renewables in Africa is also really critical. Hydro, some of the others that are, wind, solar. Africa is one of the best places to invest in that. So I think there has to be a multi-pronged strategy for this transition period that invest into the production of power on the continent for the African people, so that their deficit in power is not going to just leave them behind forever, while the rest of the world, which did all the polluting, essentially has gone forward and now can talk about climate change. We need to make sure that Africa has the space that's needed and the support and the capital that's needed to address climate change there, and to invest in transition products like gas, as well as in renewables.
Thank you. And just to buttress your point, you're very right. I am privileged to have worked with USAID in the power sector, where they are trying to address the constraint on the grids, and they're trying to have them look off-grid, which renewables, solar,
Mhm.
wind, and the likes.
Yeah.
Now I have a question from Mr. Ravi Ramamurthy. He asked Florie, is it still true that 70% or more of US FDI in Africa is tied to oil and gas? And if so, how can we broaden the engagement of the US COS? Not too sure what he means by COS. So once again, he's asking if it's true 70% or more of US foreign direct investments in Africa is tied to oil and gas. And if so, how can we broaden the engagements of US companies? Thank you for the
So
clarification.
I don't know the specific number, but it would not surprise me that a majority of U.S. Investment in the continent is in commodities such as oil and gas. It's not just oil and gas, though. There are other commodities in which the U.S. is investing. But the thing that I think is interesting is that for almost all the countries that invest in Africa, many of them also have a huge portion in raw commodities, in developing Africa's commodities, whether it's oil, gas, copper, diamonds, whatever it may be. And this again goes to some of the systemic issues that we've seen in terms of Africa's position in the global economy. Much of Africa's raw materials, as I said, are harvested by companies from other countries. That's not a bad thing, though, because you do want to attract investment into your economy in sectors that are available for growth, right? So you don't want to leave the copper in the ground. You don't want to not increase agricultural production. That's another area where U.S. companies are starting to invest in Africa in agribusiness. But I would just say that the challenge for Africa and the challenge for partnering with the U.S. as well as other partners is to slowly shift, maybe quickly shift the investments from the sectors that they're in now, which are the raw commodities, oil, gas, et cetera, into value-added production, manufacturing, industry, and into sectors in the digital economy. Finance, I think, is another area, telecom. These are all areas in Africa that are really open, fintech, for investment. And so I think in the US, our Prosper Africa program is working to do that. I know DFC is Development Finance Corporation is investing in sectors that go beyond gas and infrastructure. The US Trade and Development Agency is also doing work in Africa in health and digital ICT. So yes, Mr. Ramamurthy, it is true that the majority of investment still lies even at this point, but that number is coming down. And what's going up now are investments in other sectors beyond oil and gas and raw commodities in Africa.
Thank you. And I believe even policymakers now also looking outwards from oil and gas into non-oil industries.
Yeah.
I've got a question from Elias. Do you think the usage of common currency for trade within Africa would benefit Africa? If not, how do you think it would affect the continent?
Well, again, I'm not the expert, but one of the exciting things that I think is happening under the Afcfta, besides reducing the barriers across borders, but also setting up as many harmonized policies and platforms across the continent, so that as you go from one economy to another in Africa, there are 54, 55 countries, you don't have to constantly be dealing with different rules, different regulations, different currencies. So yes, I think that creation of a common currency across Africa will facilitate greater trade and movement of goods, as well as people across African borders. Again, I've traveled a lot in Africa. I've got lots of different different denominations of currencies and so forth here. And from my own personal point of view, it would certainly help if, when I'm taking a trip to, one African country, and I have to get a currency there, and then, I hop on a plane and go to the next country, and I have to get a different currency there. So I think I'm not a business person in that sense, but I think it is important that Africa harmonize as much of its platforms that affect trade, that affect investment, so that the movement of goods and people across the continent is facilitated.
Thank you. And just to add, seeing I am working at the central bank, well, a lot of French African countries do have CFA as a currency, which allows a lot of trade.
Mm-hmm.
The English Commonwealth African countries have agreed to, well, I guess implement, but haven't yet implemented.
Right.
So it's a good question, and I definitely.
It is. It's a very good question.
All right, I'm gonna ask one last question, and it's gonna be from Ben. And his question is, does CCA, Corporate Council on Africa, get involved in supporting student mobility between the African countries and other parts of the world? And are there programs to help university graduates find careers or career opportunities in African-based companies?
Well, I have to tell you that supporting students is not one of the things that CCA focuses on, but let me say this much. I think capacity building and training so that US companies can employ and have the skill sets they need from Africans is something that a lot of our members are focused on and are doing. We have member companies whose entire teams on the ground in key African countries, whether Kenya or Zambia or Ghana or Nigeria, are local hires. And that's something that the US tends to do more, US companies tend to do more of. Also, they tend to be more proactive in the skills training that's needed. So technology transfer, skills transfer. This is something that I think US companies tend to do well. So, to the person that asked, no, CCA is not involved in student activities, but I do think that there are US programs like the Young Africa Leaders Initiative, YALI. You should look into that one. And then in terms of, I don't know what country this person is located in, but you should feel free to look at US companies that are there on the ground in your country to see what kinds of jobs and positions are opening. I'll just use one example. I know that Flutterwave, which actually was started in Nigeria, they have recently, in the last year and a half, invested in Zambia. All of their people that they have brought on board, they're a payments platform, they're in the fintech area, have been Zambian nationals. So, you need to look for companies that are doing that are there and not just bringing over hundreds or thousands of their own workers and setting them up, instead of, really trying to work with, train, and employ Africans. And, there's so many African students, incredible people that I've met over the years who don't have the job opportunities there, and the price and the consequence for that is that, you know, there's a brain drain. But there is now the reverse rebrain that's happening, which is also very exciting. I know many people who have been in the US for many years and have now returned to their home countries of Ethiopia, Nigeria, South Africa. Oh my gosh, but I have friends who I met here, who did their studies here, who worked here, and then basically have now gone back to the continent. So I do think there are opportunities on the ground there. I just encourage this young person, young man, young woman, to look at what the opportunities are in your sector, whatever you're trained in, and see what jobs are on the ground that are being offered by any company, hopefully a US company, but you know, any company that's there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Florie. Once again, the President and CEO of the Corporate Council on Africa.